Imagine getting a tiny cut while working in an ancient village. No sword wound, no deep injury, just a small cut on your hand. You wash it with water, wrap it with a piece of cloth, and continue your day. But a few days later, your hand is swollen. Then you develop a fever, and suddenly, that tiny cut has become a fight for your life. So why was something so simple potentially deadly in ancient times? The answer is something we almost take for granted today: infection. Thousands of years ago, people didn't have antibiotics, sterile bandages, or modern hospitals. And the biggest danger wasn't always the cut itself. It was what could enter through it. Imagine you're an ancient farmer. You're cutting wood, and the sharp edge slips. Snap! A tiny piece of skin is gone. The wound might be exposed to dirt, animal waste, dirty water, or contaminated tools. And here's where things become terrifying. Bacteria can enter through broken skin. Once inside, they can multiply. At first, the wound might only look red. Then, it could become painful. Swelling could appear. Pus might form. And if the infection spread into deeper tissues or the bloodstream, the entire body could become dangerously ill. Today, a doctor can clean a wound properly, remove damaged tissue when necessary, and use antibiotics for certain bacterial infections. But an ancient person had none of that. And even clean-looking water wasn't necessarily safe. So what did people do? They used whatever their civilization had available. Some cultures used honey, oils, wine, herbs, or other substances on wounds. Some methods may actually have had useful properties. Honey, for example, can inhibit the growth of some microorganisms. But ancient medicine wasn't modern microbiology. People didn't know about bacteria. They didn't know that invisible organisms could turn a tiny injury into a serious infection. They simply saw the result: a wound that wouldn't heal, a person who became weaker, a fever that kept rising, and sometimes death. But here's the really scary part. It wasn't only cuts. A blister from walking, a splinter, a burn, a cracked piece of skin. Even an infected tooth could become dangerous. Because once infection spread beyond its original location, ancient doctors had very limited ways to stop it, and surgery was extremely risky. There were no modern anesthetics like we use today, no antibiotics, no sterile operating rooms, no modern understanding of blood loss or infection control. So imagine needing surgery in the ancient world. You wouldn't be entering a clean operating theater surrounded by modern equipment. You might be surrounded by basic instruments, assistants, and whatever medical knowledge existed in that civilization. One mistake could be catastrophic. And this is why something we barely think about today was once terrifying. A tiny wound could become a race against time. Your body was actually doing the fighting. Your immune system would try to destroy invading microbes. Sometimes it succeeded. The wound healed. Life continued. But sometimes the infection won. And the frightening thing is, you might not know how serious it was until it was already spreading. Now picture that ancient farmer again. 3 days ago, he cut his hand. Yesterday, it hurt. Today, the redness has moved farther up his arm. He has a fever. He's exhausted. His family realizes this isn't a normal wound anymore. But there is no emergency room, no ambulance, no pharmacy, no antibiotic waiting on a shelf. Only whatever treatment their community knows. And that is what makes ancient injuries so frightening. The wound could be tiny, but the consequences could be enormous. So the next time you get a small cut and simply grab a clean bandage, remember how extraordinary that actually is. Because modern medicine didn't just make major injuries safer, it transformed the danger hidden inside the smallest wounds. A cut that ancient people might have feared is something most of us barely notice today. And sometimes, history's deadliest dangers weren't giant battles or mighty weapons. They were invisible and could enter through a wound smaller than your fingernail. Weapons. They were invisible and could enter through a wound smaller than your fingernail.